a human who has a conjunction between past or present and future subjective experiences has value enough to not be murdered, but every single other non-human animal that has that same conjunction, we can go ahead and kill for food, or we can go ahead and kill to help the environment or something like that. Then it seems to me that the part that's providing all of the value in the union between the being and the conjunction of past or present and future subjective experiences is the human part, isn't it?
No, it'd be both of them together.
Yeah, and
that's what a conjunct is.
Yeah.
No, but my question is, when we talk about other non-human animals that also have the conjunction.
Can I give you an example? If
Sure,
there was a
go for
specific zygote, I wouldn't care about killing a zygote. You can kill a trillion zygotes and I wouldn't give a shit. If I slap a zygote under your view, I should go to prison, right?
And then, like, additionally, one other thing is, like, I'm pretty agnostic on ethical veganism. So, like, maybe it is.
Hayden Rodea is back, and this time he is debating two members of the Harry Sisson Soyboy crew, Dean Withers and Parker. This time they're debating the topic of abortion. Obviously, Hayden, being a Christian, is against it, and Dean Withers and Parker, being atheist, of course they're going to try to justify it in the most soy-boyiest fashion. But who knows, maybe Dean and Parker might come up with the great argument that could change our minds. Well, I'm already pressing X to doubt, but let's see how Hayden does schooling these two soy boys, Dean Withers and Parker.
I voted for Trump.
Why so?
Largely due to pro-life policies. Yeah, so I'm pro-life. He's generally going to be more favorable towards pro-life policies compared to Harris. So.
Oh, this will be fun. This will be fun. I would have run this one. Amanda, thank you for the $6 on PayPal saying Cody needs a job. So real. Show some love to Amanda. So if you're pro-life, it means you think that elective abortions are wrong.
Yes.
Name every single reason why an elective lethal abortion is morally wrong.
Why an elective abortion is wrong?
Name every reason.
It's the unjustified taking of human life.
Phenomenal. Okay. And when you say that it's the unjust termination of human life, and that's wrong, what you are entailing would be a rights violation. So let me ask you this question. What gives the life of the fetus moral value?
The fact that it is a living human organism.
Okay. So now you've made your principle clear. If one is a living human organism, they get sufficient moral value to be granted the right to life, and when you unjustly kill them, it is murder. So let me ask you this question. Okay, wait, actually, I want to go in a different direction. Do you think that all innocent human life has an identical amount of value?
I would say that all innocent human organisms have a right not to be murdered.
Yes, but do they all have the identical amount of moral value? For instance, I'm as morally valuable as you are morally valuable as a fetus is morally valuable.
Well, when you're talking about value, that would be a different thing from a right to live. We agree on that?
It's the value that grants the right to life. If something isn't morally valuable, it's not going to have the right to life.
Sure, then I would be willing to say that a born human being has equal value to a preborn human being if we're talking about value being what we're using to define as having a right not to be murdered.
Perfect. So here's my question. There's a pew-pew to your head and two buttons in front of you. Button number 1 unalives 10 cryogenically frozen human zygotes that are biologically alive and are human. Button number 2 unalives 1 newborn. Which button are you pressing?
Why do I have to press one of the buttons?
Because if you don't press either of the buttons, everyone dies. 10 zygotes, 1 newborn, and you. You have to press the button.
Okay, just want to make sure I got the question correct. Is it okay if I repeat it back to you?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so you're saying that I have to push one of 2 buttons. There's no other option. If I don't push any of the buttons, then everyone dies. And the option is I push either button A, in which case 10 frozen embryos, for example, those at an IVF clinic would die. And if I push button B, then it sounds like a newborn human would die. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so let's say that I was to say that I push the button that would ultimately result in the death of the newborn human being, which if I'm trying to preserve the maximum amount of living human organisms would be the route that I would want to take, right? Let's say that I choose to do that. Can you tell me how that would then justify abortion?
Jesus Christ.
Can you tell me how that would then justify abortion?
Why'd you say if, as if that isn't the logical?
Well, at first I said if, and then I also said that I'm taking that position, and then I asked, how that would justify abortion.
So Hayden, we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
We haven't gotten around to my justification insofar as why I think that elective lethal abortions prior to a given point are morally permissible. The reason why I asked you this question is to demonstrate an absurdity. And in fact, the absurdity in this case would be that you'd value 10 cryogenically frozen unicellular organisms over a newborn.
The fact that I would value 10 living human organisms over 1 living human organism?
Yes. When
Yeah,
the
yeah, because
concept
they're
is
single cell organisms.
Just a follow-up question on that. When you
Feel free
say
to ask a follow-up question.
well,
and I have
just
another
hang on,
one
just
for
hang
you
on.
because I
When
wanna
you
play
say
off that.
when you said that it was absurd, by what standard are you judging it to be absurd?
Yeah, we'd be judging it to be absurd based upon like my preferences.
Okay,
Of
but my
course, if you don't
preference,
think that
but
this
my
is-
preferences differ
Hayden,
from
Hayden,
yours. So who's right?
Fi, don't interrupt me. I'll describe it to you. You have to be able to let me speak. Are you okay with having a productive?
Sure, but
two-street
I would like the
conversation?
chance to respond because it seems like you just want to not give me a
You
chance to
have a
respond
chance
after
to
asking
respond
questions.
after I'm
Okay.
done. You don't have a chance to respond midway through my sentence.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yeah, just one question. It looks like that's what I was going to ask.
Feel free to unmute. I don't want to say anything until you're.
No,
unmuted, 'cause
I was.
don't like
I
being
just saw I was muted, and I have not joined someone else's live before, so I wasn't sure how to unmute. But then it popped up on the screen, so I was just going to ask about
because I
that.
invited you on a mute. So is it fair for me to say that you can have a chance to respond once I'm done speaking, but you will not have a chance to respond in the middle of my sentence?
Sure, but just a follow up on that.
Okay.
If I say
So
that,
you don't get a follow up though, because remember, I was
I'm
in the
not
middle of
asking
my
a question.
sentence.
I'm just asking.
Sir, no,
Oh my
you
goodness.
don't get a follow up because I was in the middle of my
And
sentence.
I'm muted.
To your last follow up. In order for us to have a productive conversation, we both have to be able to have a chance to speak. I notice the biggest issue with a lot of people that come up here and debate, a lot of people that debate in general, this is true of the right as it's true of a lot of people on the left, right, is trying to remove
I'm
a chance
muted still.
for a response, right? I feel as if you're trying to
Still
avoid
muted.
an actual conversation because you don't want me to address what you say. So I'm going to address what you say one by one, and you
Muted.
can respond and then ask me new questions one by one. I can do the same thing to you. That's how you have a productive
Still
conversation.
muted.
I hate that I have to teach this to people. Okay.
Just-
so the last thing you asked me is how is it absurd, right? Or what determines absurdity? I told you that I'm indexing the absurdity to my preferences. You then told me, well, what if you have different preferences? Who's right and who's wrong? So in that situation, there's going to be no objective arbiter of whose preferences mean more. So you're right. That would be a dead-end position, as it didn't entail a contradiction, right? So here's the next step, okay? And I wanted to take it in this route. Let's see here. So you think that all human organisms deserve the exact same amount of moral value and are all deserving of a similar human life. And I want to see how far you're willing to take this to see if it's truly the human life that you value or if there's other traits that you value that you're just not making clear. If there was a human zygote that were to remain a human zygote for the rest of its existence and not grow into anything more, not have any potential or capacity for a higher level of rationale, etc., would you value it the same as you value yourself, or me, or Parker, or anyone else?
Yes.
Okay. Now please tell me why you should value a unicellular organism that will remain a unicellular organism insofar as determining that it's murder as long as it's a part of our species. Meanwhile, you don't think you're doing anything wrong when you brush your teeth and kill 400 trillion life forms.
Is he talking about like what, germs, like our bacteria? Is he comparing freaking? See, this is the thing with these people is that they compare human life to like these microorganisms, like if they're the same thing. Also, too, I don't know if Hayden caught this, but Dean over here, is this Dean or Parker? I really don't care.
Of a similar size, standard, and growth potential as that unicellular organism.
Sure. So when I brush my teeth, I'm not killing any living human organisms. And if you reject the standard that all living human organisms are equally valuable and equally have a right not to be murdered, then I would argue you end up with some repugnant consequences. Now, the problem with your line of questioning here is that you still haven't established an absolute standard of rationality by which you're going to judge my answers or yours outside of your personal preference. And if your personal preference is the only standard you're judging my answers by, then all I have to do is judge your answers by my personal preference, and there is no ultimate arbiter, is there?
So Hayden, as I already described, when we want to use our preferences to determine what's absurd and what's not absurd, you're right, and that's why I'd classify that as a dead end. However, the absolute standard for rationale would just be the three consequential classical laws of logic. And we typically judge the internal validity of an argument based upon an internal contradiction given in another belief in which you hold to be true. However, to go ahead and finish off what I was originally saying to you, you said that
essentially
you'd
what he's saying
value-
is that it's going to end up violating your own intuitions by the use of
Yeah.
like some sort of consistency test.
Okay,
Yeah,
just
and the
hang on.
consistency
One
test
question
would be
there.
guided-
If I allow you to follow.
because I was in
Oh
the
my
middle of
goodness,
speaking
I'm muted
still.
again.
We agreed that in order for us to have a fair conversation, we both have to be able to finish speaking. I allowed you to do that. And of
I was
course you
just
allowed
trying to
me do that
clarify.
too.
Yeah, that was my bad for cutting him off.
Oh no, you're good, Parker. I think he
Still
hopped in
muted.
after that and took it as a way to respond. So
Oh, you're good, Parker. You're good, honey. You could interrupt any way you want, but this guy right here, we gotta mute him. But you're good, Parker. No worries, sweetie buns.
To go back to what I was saying, so you told me that you would value a unicellular organism that had no growth potential and would remain a unicellular organism for the rest of its existence as long as it's a part of our species. So tell me why similar genome in the sense of the structure of our DNA, or I guess similar enough for biologists to classify as a part of your same species, is morally valuable. I find that to be insane, and I'd ask you for your reasons why.
So just to clarify the question again, so the reasoning why I would value a living human organism at the zygote stage, so the one-celled stage, versus other forms of one-cellular life.
That is the only stage it will exist in ever.
Yes, and you're asking me to compare that to the value of something that is also one cell but doesn't have unique human DNA, so something like a horse at the zygote stage or something like that?
Actually, no. The question that I'm asking you is why is DNA that is sufficiently similar to yourself to be categorized as a Homo sapiens sapien grant moral value?
Because it's made in the image of God.
There we go.
Okay, and then do I have a chance to examine your position yet?
Almost. There's one more thing that I bet Parker would want to run on you as it relates to Christianity and your pro-choice position.
I mean, you can run
ahead,
your
Parker.
thing on him. There's just one point I would want to bring up with.
Okay, fantastic.
We'll leave it up to you. I've been asking things of you. You get to choose, Hayden.
Yeah, I've been waiting a while. And just a quick clarification: when I was trying to ask a question, it actually wasn't going to be about your position. It was just going to be about the course of the conversation going forward. So I wasn't actually interrupting to try to sort of ask a question that would help my view. I was just trying to clarify sort of the terms of the future of the conversation. So I did just want to clarify that. But now that I do have a chance to examine your view, what would you consider makes a human being, actually any being, value? What would you consider gives a being a right not to be murdered by another human being?
Yeah, so I hold a conjunct to distribute moral value sufficient to grant the right to life. I hold the same conjunct as Parker, and that would be a conjunct between past or present, and future subjective experiences. If you'd like me to explain to you what a conjunct is, if you don't happen to know, please feel free to ask. However, I bet you do.
Yeah, and so one question I have under that conjunct, can you give me an example then of beings that would fit that?
Sure. Like a fetus at about 20 through 24 weeks, in accordance with the current medical consensus on when the ability to deploy any level of sentience emerges. It would be an example of an individual or an entity that fit that conjunct, or just like you and I. You.
Okay. So yeah, just a clarification then on that. Let me make sure I got your position here right. So your position would be that you value any life form that has a conjunction between past or present and future subjective experiences?
So typically this conjunction would be applied to grant the right to life in a special sense to humans, but that gets into like a lot of nonsense. So like for all intensive purposes, that'd be the position. It would entail ethical veganism. You might take it down that road. And that's just, I'd say, the easiest position to argue for all intents and purposes. But the water could get muddy. Like for instance, if you could hold like another clarification of you also have to be a human for some other reasons, but
there's just another
conjunct is generally true.
Okay, so just a question on that then. If you had to choose between saving 10 adult pigs or one newborn human being, which would you choose?
It'd be the newborn human being,
absolutely,
for the reason that we already listed.
What's that reason? Maybe I missed it.
Yeah,
in the conjunct of human. They meet a particular threshold of rationality. So we also have the same.
Just 1 second there. Don't all of the adult pigs also have a conjunct between past or present and future subjective experiences?
Yeah, but they don't meet the second conjunct of also being human.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay, I guess another line of reasoning that then might help me understand your position a little bit better. If I offered you guys, and I'm not going to give you guys this money, but just take it as hypotheticals for the sake of me sort of examining your position here. If I offered you $1 million plus a plastic water bottle that is empty, what would you offer to pay me for that?
Wait, say that one more time?
Yeah, if I offered you $1 million in addition to a plastic water bottle that is completely empty, how much would you offer to pay me for that?
Anything under $1 million?
Okay, so like roughly $1 million.
Under $1 million.
Yeah, I'm
okay. So like
with the relevance of this one.
Well, we'll get there. So like $999,999, you can make $1 profit.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously that's in like a theoretical sense. Like we wouldn't actually like be willing to do that in real terms because there's plenty of opportunity costs. You have to take into account liability, other types of.
Okay, but roughly would $999,000 roughly be about what you'd pay, right?
I'd offer to pay you anything that would inevitably.
Like,
how about this? We just set this principle.
Okay.
I'd offer to pay you anything that would inevitably allow me to profit.
Okay, let me maybe rephrase then.
Yeah, that's
what
theoretical, but like in reality, that wouldn't.
Okay, let me rephrase that in a way that might be more helpful. What is the value of $1 million plus an empty plastic water bottle, roughly?
Like $1 million and like 3 cents.
Okay, thank you. What is the value of a plastic water bottle and a crushed pop can?
Like, I don't know, 6 cents maybe?
Okay, and what is the value of $1 million plus a crushed pop can?
Like, once again, $1 million and 3
Okay.
cents.
Gotcha. So the reason that I brought that up is because it seems to me that when you say a human who has a conjunction between past or present and future subjective experiences has value enough to not be murdered, but every single other non-human animal that has that same conjunction, we can go ahead and kill for food, or we can go ahead and kill to help the environment or something like that, then it seems to me that the part that's providing all of the value in the union between the being and the conjunction of past or present and future subjective experiences is the human part, isn't it?
No, it'd be both of them together.
Yeah. And
That's what a conjunct is.
Yeah.
No, but my question is, when we talk about other non-human animals
Because if
that
it's
also
just
have the
human, I'll give you an
conjunction.
example. Can I give you an example? If
Sure,
there was a
go for it.
specific zygote, I wouldn't care about killing a zygote. You can kill 1 trillion zygotes and I wouldn't give a shit. If I
Yeah.
slap a zygote under your view, I should go to prison, right?
And then, like, additionally, one other thing is, like, I'm pretty agnostic on ethical veganism. So, like, maybe it is.
I wonder if they would kill a zygote, with their bare hands. Like, so if you were to actually put a zygote in their hand and like tell them to throw it against the wall, throw it in the trash, do whatever you want with it, just kill it. I wonder if they would be able to do it though, is the thing. I think they're being a little disingenuous. I think it's easy for them to say, yeah, I don't care if you kill zygotes. Yeah, whatever. Okay, but would you be able to kill it if I were to give it to you? And would you be able to kill it with your bare hands though?
Or something along those lines, but
Yeah, but like we would still say that like we would rather save 1 newborn baby over 10, right? Ethical. That's not an entailment of ethical veganism. All right, and we can have our separate discussions on like veganism and stuff like that, and what that would entail. But having a difference in value between humans and non-humans isn't like an entailment of veganism.
And then another perspective on why, like, I might save like a newborn baby over like a billion, well, not a billion pigs, maybe a billion pigs, who knows? Is that I'd care sufficiently much more about the second condition of the conjunct, that being their future capabilities, but it's going to be entirely predicated on past or present.
Well, just one question there. If it's about
the predication of future abilities on past or present abilities, present that in a fetus, like in a fetus at 20 through 24 weeks, so a newborn baby, are going to be considerably more valuable than a pig. However, you still hold that axiomatic truth, that being that you could only make future considerations predicated on what has existed prior or what currently does.
So let's try this then. So same scenario I mentioned earlier, where you can either save those 10 pigs or the 1 newborn human, but you know that 1 newborn human has some sort of birth defect where they're actually guaranteed to die at about 2 years old. So you can't really appeal to them having a future conscious experience that exceeds that of a pig, since consciousness is more of a spectrum than a dividing line. It's something that increases over time, increases with development. Which would you choose then, knowing that newborn human being isn't going to develop past age 2? It'll die at age 2.
I don't see why this would be an entailment. We would still say the human. I'd still rather save the human.
And doesn't that expose though that what's providing all the value is the humanity and not the conjunction?
No. What's providing the value is those traits together. That's how a conjunction works.
No, but what I'm pointing out though is when I take
Both of
those same
traits in conjunction, because I just explained to you, I wouldn't care if you killed an infinite level of human zygotes, right? They have that human, right, but they don't have the sentience. So you understand that you could say from both perspectives, right, that one's carrying the weight of the other one. Well, they're both carrying it together. That's how a conjunction works.
But the sentience is pretty clearly not what's mattering here, is it?
Well, I just explained specifically it's sentience plus the fact that they're human, right?
And the human's doing all the work there.
No, it's not. I just explained in the context of a human zygote. I don't care if you were to kill an infinite set of human zygotes.
I think I would like to raise a point to demonstrate like how much sentience matters, and I think I could relay this point to you in a way that you might be able to agree. So let's just assume that the entirety of the species of humanity remains the same. However, all right, humans evolved in such a way to not deploy any sentience. We were meat bags on the floor. In this alternative world, who would you rather save? 10 of the meat bag non-sentient humans, or 1 cow?
So just one question here. If I assume that worldview, then Christianity would necessarily not be true. Do you recognize that, right?
Well, Christianity is already
you're assuming macroevolution. which would contradict the biblical account of Genesis.
Okay, so in other words,
Wait, you think evolution contradicts Genesis?
Believing that the Earth is millions of years old and that it wasn't created in 6 days is an obvious contradiction. So you'll get different numbers depending on how you go through the chronological order of events in the Bible, but I would say less than 25,000 years is what you'd probably have to answer if you believe in a literal Genesis.
Wait, so you just like you deny science completely and totally just because your biblical view says so? That's like actually insane.
Hey Parker,
25,000 years?
Is science based on the uniformity of nature?
What do you mean by uniformity of nature?
That nature will act in the future as it has in the past?
No, what we're saying is it's likely to, right? So we're not saying it's certain. What we're saying is it's very likely to. Based on the evidence within the context of science, is we're saying it's very likely.
And when you say it's likely to, what are you basing that on?
We're basing it on priors.
On priors? So if I ask you how you know gravity will act tomorrow?
It's on models. It's on models.
If I ask you, okay, so again, just give me a chance to ask a question. If I ask you, how do you know gravity will act tomorrow as it has in the past, what would your answer be?
Again, probability.
But that begs the question.
How's that beg? What begs what question?
Because I didn't ask.
Are you saying we require certainty in order to be able to establish true claims?
Again, I'm just going to repeat the question, and I'll point out how it's begging the question fallacy. I'm trying to. When I say, how do you know gravity will act tomorrow as it has in the past, and then you say, well, it's likely to based on what's happened in the past. I'm not asking about what's happened in the past. I'm asking about what's going to happen in the future, aren't I?
It's probability.
And what are you basing that probability on?
What probability?
What are you basing the probability on?
Based upon what's occurred.
So you're basing it on the past.
It's occurred a repetitive level of times.
Am I asking about the past or the future?
Hayden, can I explain to you how this can justify a greater level of probability?
Go for it.
If you can identify that something happens over and over and over again on a repetitive basis, does that increase the probability that that is the cause of the action?
Do you just
Can I answer what Parker just asked?
Let him answer quick, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So if I was to go buy 1,000 red houses and you asked me what color is the next house going to be, and I say that it's red because that's what the houses have been in the past.
Yeah, that would be most likely, yeah.
Do I know? Really?
What do you mean?
No, Parker.
Most likely.
Really?
Dude, no.
What the heck is freaking Dean soying out about right here? No, Parker! When Hayden brought up about how old the Earth is, I think Dean said, that's horrifying, dude. And then Parker's all laughing. But Hayden's right here. Like, just because there's a pattern here, that doesn't mean it's going to be a definite predictor of what's going to happen in the future. Patterns aren't the best form of measurement. Wait, how did we get onto here anyway?
It could be any color.
Wait, no, it could be any color, but what is most likely?
Nah,
hang on. How do you know that it's most likely to be red?
Again, because of the fact that there are priors that indicate the likelihood of it being this way.
And so if I flip a coin,
probability of it being
there's a better example you could use. Hayden.
Yeah, if I roll a dice, for example, that's 10-sided, and it lands on 10.
All you're bringing up is the problem of induction. I'm not disputing that there is a problem, but that's not a problem in terms of the likelihood or whether or not we can say true things are the case, right? It is just simply describing that we're not certain. Okay, wait. Us not being certain is not a critique of the worldview.
Do you live like that?
I live based on probability, right? What are you talking about?
On this,
you don't have a basis for it.
On this particular point, 1 second. On this particular point, Hayden is right, mathematically speaking. However, he's obfuscating between two separate positions. So the positions that he's obfuscating between is like a prediction of like gravity existing tomorrow because it existed prior, and like the prediction of what is going to be true of the next coin flip because of the coin flips prior. So like, for instance, if you flip a coin like 100 times and the first 50 times you flip it, it lands heads, right? That doesn't increase the probability of it landing heads the next, right? And he's trying to use this point to obfuscate between this other point that's because we
have other knowledge about other priors or other things that could be the case. If we didn't have that knowledge, we wouldn't be able to make that assertion.
Okay, I didn't track that.
No. If you don't have knowledge about something, you're going to be able to make a different probabilistic assertion, right? Because evidence points towards a particular thing. That's reasonable for someone to conclude if it is the case that they have a certain set of information.
Hey, just one question. I know we're kind of getting over towards religion. I do want to be respectful of the prompt you have up if you guys do want to take it back to the Trump will be terrible for America.
Before we do it, I want to run one thing on you.
Go for it.
Do you think you should do as God does?
This was the first 21 minutes of a debate that ended up lasting about an hour and a half. The rest of the debate mainly focused on the problem of evil and free will. However, in this video, I want to concentrate specifically on our discussion about abortion and why I still believe Dean and Parker hold an inconsistent position. When I asked if they would save 10 adult pigs who have a conjunct of past or present and future subjective experiences over one newborn human who also has a conjunct of past or present and future subjective experiences, they said they'd save the newborn human. This clearly indicates that what they are really valuing is humanity and not consciousness. A 25-week-old human fetus has significantly less consciousness than an adult pig, so their choice would only make sense if what they're valuing is the humanity of the newborn. Some of their supporters might argue that Dean and Parker don't value humanity itself since they're comfortable with someone intentionally destroying embryos in an IVF clinic without being charged with murder. However, this simply highlights the inconsistency in how they apply their values. I believe Dean and Parker would both agree with these two statements. Statement number 1. Any living human organism with a conjunct of past or present and future subjective experiences has moral value regardless of how long they will live naturally and what degree of consciousness they currently have or will have in the future. Implicit in this first statement is that the human being has at least reached the point of consciousness as described by the conjunct, which Dean and Parker would acknowledge occurs at about 24 weeks gestation. Statement number 2. Any living human organism with a conjunct of past or present and future subjective experiences has significantly more moral value than any non-human animal. In order to affirm both statements, there must be something that all humans with a conjunct of past or present and future subjective experiences have either to a greater degree than non-human animals or that non-human animals lack entirely. But Dean and Parker can't argue that born humans surpass animals in consciousness, since human consciousness doesn't typically exceed that of adult pigs until around age 3. Moreover, some humans never reach a higher level of consciousness than adult pigs due to brain injuries, genetic conditions, or fatal birth defects occurring before age 2. They might attempt to argue that humans have specific biological structures for consciousness developing around 24 weeks, structures that animals lack. This resembles an argument Destiny uses for his pro-choice stance. However, this argument also fails. It raises the question of why these biological structures matter. If the reason is consciousness itself, it runs into the earlier problem. Some animals have higher consciousness levels than some humans will ever achieve. To clarify why the equipment for consciousness argument fails, consider this hypothetical conversation between two pro-choice individuals. Pro-choicer A says human forelimbs are valuable because they enable humans to throw baseballs faster than animals. Pro-choicer B correctly points out that some animals can throw baseballs faster than certain humans with injuries or birth defects. Thus, A's position implies chimpanzees could have more moral value than some 1-year-old humans. Similarly, valuing human biological structures solely for producing consciousness fails because some non-human animals with their own biological structures achieve greater consciousness than some 1-year-old humans ever will. Ultimately, for Dean and Parker to affirm the two statements I mentioned earlier, they would have to take the view that what makes humans morally valuable is their humanity, which exists from fertilization and therefore would require a pro-life position. Some of you may still question if they would affirm both statements, but I think they implicitly acknowledge they would when I ask them this. So let's try this then. So same scenario I mentioned earlier where you can either save those 10 pigs or the one newborn human, but you know that one newborn human has some sort of birth defect where they're actually guaranteed to die at about 2 years old. So you can't really appeal to them having a future conscious experience that exceeds that of a pig, since consciousness is more of a spectrum than a dividing line. It's something that increases over time, increases with development. Which would you choose then, knowing that that newborn human being isn't going to develop past age 2? It'll die at age 2.
I don't see why this would be an entailment. We would still say the human. I'd still rather say the human.
Now that I've covered why I think their position fails, I want to highlight some things I could have done better in the conversation I had with them about abortion. Number 1, I should have asked for clarification on how the conversation was going to proceed when I first joined the live. Number 2, when I was asked the hypothetical about being in a situation where I had to push a button that would kill either 10 human embryos, push a different button that would kill one newborn human being, or push no button and they all are killed, I should have asked them if I could reframe the question to the situation of a burning building where I can only save the 10 embryos or the one newborn in order to prevent the conversation from potentially raising an additional number of ethical questions, such as the doctrine of double effect, consequentialism, or just war theory. This would have allowed them to see that I value human embryos equally to newborn human beings, without potentially introducing additional ethical questions that could have derailed the conversation, although in this case, that didn't occur. I then should have asked them to consider how racists in the South in the 1800s would have answered a similar question were they given the choice between saving 10 black humans and 1 white human. This would have exposed that Dean and Parker are prejudiced against a class of human beings, in this case, humans prior to 20 to 24 weeks of development, similar to how the racists of the early 1800s were prejudiced against another class of human beings. In that case, it was black people. Number 3. When asked about whether I would value humans who evolved to not have sentience beyond that of a cow, I answered that it is not possible for that to be the case from within the Christian worldview, given it assumes macroevolution. I'd like to add that even professing Christians who believe in macroevolution would have to acknowledge that humans could not have evolved in a way as to never become sentient beyond that of a cow, given that Adam was the first human being and he was sentient beyond the level of a cow's sentience. Therefore, from within the Christian worldview, it is not possible for humans to have never been sentient beyond the level of a cow as a species. When I mentioned that I believe in the six-day creation account described in Genesis, Parker said, quote, "You deny science completely and totally just because your biblical view says so. That's like actually insane," end quote. But science is entirely reliant on the assumption of uniformity in nature, in the past, present, and future. And that assumption can't be justified if we assume that there is no God, which is why I challenged Parker on it. That being said, I likely should have just let that comment by Parker go by without a follow-up or response and tried to keep the conversation on abortion, since once uniformity of nature was brought up, the conversation got derailed and never returned to abortion.
I like Hayden. I like how he reviews his own debates, and he gives what he thinks he could have done better. Me personally, from what I've seen, I mean, it is pretty clear, and I think Hayden did a good job getting this out of them. It is like a prejudice against the unborn, because their priorities. It's they say it's ridiculous when we compare it to slavery, but it's absolutely comparable to slavery. We need these people to do our free labor, and their human rights be damned. In fact, they don't have any human rights because we don't even consider them human. They're our property, and therefore it's okay to mistreat them because they're not even really human anyway. It's the same thing with the unborn. Well, it's important that we keep this procedure around for the mothers. But what about my mothers? What about the ones that can't take care of their babies? What about the ones that are in college? What about the ones that just don't want it? Or what about their health reasons? What about their health? Therefore, it's okay that we unalive them. In fact, they're not even human. They're not conscious, and therefore it is completely okay. For no justifiable reason, by the way. Women don't need this procedure. It's not a necessity. The people that believe it's a necessity are being lied to. There's no proof that we need this, that we need medical abortions. There is no medical needs for it. And I haven't even heard the left list any. The ones that they list off are not even like, it's like ectopic pregnancies, which is not an abortion procedure. It's a situation where the unborn is going to die anyway. That unalived baby, it's already passed. It's not an abortion procedure. But even in that hypothetical situation where you have a gun to your head, that's a horrible situation because you're being forced to make an awful decision. But you're actually being forced. Like you're going to be unalived if you don't make this decision. Well, actually, everyone's going to be unalived. So, of course, if you want to preserve more life, it would make sense to choose the 10 zygotes. But you would still feel guilt for the rest of your life for the fact that you had to press the button of the newborn. You would live with that guilt for the rest of your life. But it's not a good analogy. Women don't have guns to their heads and are being forced to get abortions. So it's a completely non-analogous situation. But good on Hayden for having this debate with them. What did you guys think of how Hayden did? Sound off in the comment section below. Subscribe to my channel if you enjoy content like this. Also, give a sub to Hayden's channel too. I have a link down to the original video in the description below. If you like seeing Hayden Rodia do his thing, I got a playlist on the screen that I think you'll enjoy, and a whole bunch more content with debates like this that I think you'll enjoy.